Well, today is August the 19th, 2026, and it is my 79th birthday. That means that I'm now going to start to enter the 80th year of my life. And I used to do videos. Deborah and I, for years, we had a website and a YouTube channel for our boating adventures. And we boated all over the Great Lakes, the Ohio River, the Tennessee River, inland lakes, and that kind of thing for a number of years. And I had a YouTube channel and put videos up on that. We had a variety of boats over the time and had a fair number of followers. And then when we stopped our boating, I took all of that stuff down, deleted all the videos from YouTube and that kind of thing. And then for a while, we had a travel trailer, and we had a YouTube channel for that, our travels in that travel trailer, primarily because Deborah had multiple sclerosis, was in a wheelchair full time, and the travel trailer had a wheelchair lift, and so we did videos about how to be able to use a travel trailer if you were in a wheelchair. And then when we got done doing that, I took those videos down and we got rid of that channel. And I hadn't really posted any videos online since then, other than one or two for some close family. But I thought, since this is my birthday and it's my 79th birthday and I'm going to start this 80th year, I wanted to put a video up, and but not to make it about me. I want to make this video and tell a couple of things about the person that probably had the most influence on me in my entire life, who I loved and still love dearly. And that's my partner in life and my wife, Deborah Markham. And the reason I wanted to do that is because Deborah was such a special person. And I want her to be remembered, and I want the things that made her special to be remembered. And so I thought this would be a good time to do that. So I'll just say a couple of things. Deb and I, we met on October the 10th, 1964. I was 17, she was 16. There's a great story to it, but essentially her aunt and uncle introduced us. She was by far the most beautiful girl I ever saw in my life. And I was just a skinny little guy with a big nose and didn't think I had a chance, but I ended up asking her out and she went. And from that time forward, we ended up being a couple. And we were actually a couple for over 60 years that way. We married about 3 years later. I was in the Air Force, and we started life together. When we got married, I was 20, she was 19, and we were married for 57 years. And I say were because Deborah passed away about 1.5 years ago. She passed away on April the 2nd, 2025. But she had a good life, and I know a happy life, because she always said she was happy. And my God, she made my life everything. What made Deborah so amazing was just her outlook on life and who she was, the strength she has. She was a strong, independent, very intelligent woman. But in 1985, in July of 85, she started to experience some things. She actually lost her vision in her right eye. Was diagnosed as optic neuritis. Her vision came back in that eye, almost fully, but very good. What we didn't know at the time is that was like one of the symptoms that would eventually be one of the symptoms of multiple sclerosis. And in 1988, she was finally diagnosed in January of 1988 with multiple sclerosis. But over the years, multiple sclerosis, it took its toll. She went through a period where She could no longer walk without assistance. She started walking with a cane. Then she got to the point where she had to have a walker. Finally, it got to the point where she could walk with the walker, but if we were going to go somewhere and had to go any distance, we took a wheelchair, and she would have to have the wheelchair to go. And over time, it got to the point where eventually, late in her life, she was totally dependent on a wheelchair. And through those times, our lives changed some. We were kind of a traditional couple, and she did laundry and she cooked and she cleaned and she did all of those kind of things, bought groceries and stuff, and I worked outside the home. But it was after I retired, and over time it got to the point where she could no longer do the laundry, and she showed me how to do it. She could no longer cook, and she put up with me making some horrible meals, but coaching me through cooking until I got to be a pretty good cook, and I could cook. She taught me the good ways to be able to clean and things like that. And so, our roles kind of shifted a little bit that way. But again, we were happy, both of us. We made a decision when I was in I'm going to say about my mid-50s, our mid-50s. We made a decision that, we're going to start doing things that we likely aren't going to be able to do when I retire. So we're going to start doing them now. So, I mentioned that, we had a YouTube channel about boating. We had a big boat, actually had several big boats. We cruised the Great Lakes, the rivers. And the thing that was good about those is, we could get on the boat. If she felt like getting off, she didn't have to. The scenery all came to her. And the cruising was the part of it we enjoyed. And we get to, some little town up in Canada or something and get off the boat, take the wheelchair, or we had an electric scooter that we could take with us and do things like that. So we had a very full life. I mean, both of us had a very full life. MS took nothing away from me. And in her life, she would tell you it took nothing away from her. Took her mobility away, but she would tell you if you were to say, "Oh, Deborah, I'm so sorry you got MS," she'd tell you 50 people had something worse. That was her attitude. It was MS. She had it. That was part of her life. She dealt with it. She was the strongest woman I think I've ever known. She never lost her compassion through that entire time. She had a favorite charity, St. Jude's, and every year that's the Christmas gift we would give to each other as a contribution to St. Jude's. She had compassion for others, and she was very loving to me. Most wonderful woman I ever knew. The next thing I'm going to tell you is about Deborah's passing. Deborah had gotten to the point in the last years of her life to where it was difficult for her to speak. And if she met new people, she would be somewhat embarrassed. But we ended up moving in 2023. At the end of 2022, we moved back to an area that we both had grown up in. We had some family here, and we still had some friends that lived here. And we moved back here. We built a house. Deborah picked the house out. It was one that was being built. It's a craftsman-style house, and it was being built as a spec home, but we got into it early enough that we could pick out the flooring and countertops and colors and all that kind of thing. But she only had a few years left after that. We didn't know that at the time. But her health had deteriorated, and it continued to through that period. When Deborah finally brought her home from the hospital the last time that she was in, and we'd come to the conclusion that really the best thing was for her to come home and be under hospice care. And I brought her home, and I had in our bedroom, I had the hospital bed put in there next to our bed. And in the evening, I could lower her hospital bed, and I could lay in our bed and hold her hand. And the last weeks of her life, we were together and as close as we ever were. And she was still smiling. She always smiled, and she would laugh. And, we had family and friends that would come by. Our two nieces were absolutely wonderful with her. And they would come, and they would all end up laughing and that kind of thing. And then it got to the end, and if you've dealt with hospice before, I have in the past with my parents and Deborah's parents. But you reach a certain point, and the person kind of, they're no longer really conscious. They're there, and you're expecting the end to come any time. And the hospice nurses had come, and we just couldn't figure out why, she was hanging on like she was. And she lived a couple of days longer than we thought. But here's what ended up happening, and I'll tell you what I believe. The day that Deborah passed, I got up like I always did in the morning. I came out and got coffee for myself. I would go in and I would sit in the rocking chair next to the hospital bed, and I would hold her hand and I would talk to her. And I have a cousin here who's a retired Presbyterian minister. And I told everybody that if you come, don't ring a doorbell or knock. Come to the back door, which happened to be right across from where our bedroom door was, and just come on in. I'll unlock the door during the daytime. And this cousin came, and she opened the door and came in. And she had made me a container of homemade vegetable soup and was bringing that over for me. And so I got up, and we came out in the kitchen for just a few minutes. I put the soup in the refrigerator. And she said, before I leave, I was wondering if I could say a prayer with you and Deb. And I said, yes, by all means. So we went back in, and she was going to get on one side of the bed and hold Deborah's hand, and I was going to be on the other and hold the other hand. And then Jackie, the pastor, and I were going to hold hands. And when I went to reach for Deborah's hand, I looked and I said, Jackie, wait a minute. I think she might be gone. And I felt for a pulse, and there was no pulse. There was no breath. We waited for a few moments, and I was sure she was gone. Her eyes were half open. I closed her eyes. And I said, Jackie, she's gone. I'm going to have to call the hospice nurses. And she said, well, before you do that, can we say that prayer? And she did. We held Deborah's hands. And it was a beautiful, beautiful prayer. And so then we came back out, and Jackie said, if you'd like, I'll stay with you till the hospice nurses get here. And I said, well, that's fine, but I'd like you to stay out here in the living room. I want to go back in with Deb. So I called the hospice nurses. I went back in with Deb, and about a half hour later, they came. And they were wonderful. One of them actually lives in the neighborhood here. But they were wonderful, and I came back out in the living room with Jackie, and they cleaned Deborah up, and then they helped me remove her jewelry. And in the meantime, they had called the funeral home. We had arrangements for them to come and pick Deborah up. Jackie asked me if I wanted her to stay, and I said, no, I want to be alone with Deb. The hospice nurses asked if they needed to stay, and I said, no, I just want to be alone. And I was alone with her. Finally, they came and they got her and they took Deb. So I sat down and I started to text people to let them know, people that had prayed for Deborah. I texted them to let them know that she was with the angels. And I texted a cousin of mine, John, and his wife Leanne are in Tennessee. And Deborah and I had seen them like a year or two before that. We had taken some things down there and met with, John and Leanne had come over to where we were, and we'd seen them. And I texted John to say, Deborah's with the angels. And then all of a sudden my phone rings. And I answered it, like just as soon as I texted him, it was John. And I said, oh, John, you got my text? And he said, yeah. And he said, I'm on my way. I'm going to be there in about 2 hours. And I said, you're going to be here in 2 hours? And he said, yeah, I'll tell you about it when I get there. Now, normally for him to drive up here would be like a 6 or 7 hour drive from where he lived in Tennessee. Now, here's the story. John said that it was Deborah passed on a Wednesday, said on Monday he had this overwhelming sensation that he needed to be here with me on Wednesday. So he just had this overwhelming sensation that he needed to be here on Wednesday. And Leanne told him, well, I think there's supposed to be storms. You ought to just go ahead and go up there tomorrow on Tuesday. And he said, no, I'm supposed to be there on Wednesday. And so, that's why he was here. He had this overwhelming sensation that he needed to be here on Wednesday. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, I have a good friend who lives in Washington State. He's a brother-in-law of another cousin of mine. And he and I talked every week. But on Tuesday, the day before Deborah passed, every morning I would call that cousin and let her know how Deborah was doing. And I called and she said, well, there's somebody here that wants to talk to you. And he got on the phone. And I said, well, what are you doing here? And he said, I came here because you needed me. So that Tuesday, and it had been a pretty rough few weeks, but that Tuesday, he came up that afternoon. He said, look, I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to stay down at Sandy's. But whatever you need, if you need me to come up and sit with Deborah for a while so you can step out, I'll do that. If you need groceries, I'll go get them. If you need me to cook you a meal, I'll cook a meal. If you need me just to talk. Well, what I needed that Tuesday afternoon, I was feeling pretty low. I needed him just to talk, and he was here. So all of a sudden, here out of the clear blue, these two things happen. This friend shows up from Washington State, shows up on Tuesday afternoon, and we talked about old times and times that he and his wife and my cousin Sandy and Deborah and I had all been together and things we'd done, and it just cleared my mind. And then here the next day, after Deborah passes, my cousin shows up from Tennessee, and we did the same thing. We talked about the times that we were all together, and it was just what I needed for that afternoon and that evening. We sat here that evening and talked, went to bed. The next morning we got up, I fixed breakfast, he got in the car and left. I believe Deborah was telling God, look, I can't leave. You have to do some things so he'll be okay. I believe she knew that it would be very difficult for me to lose her after 60 years. That's what I think. I believe she knew that. And I believe that God finally gave up and said, Deborah, Deborah was a Walker. That was her family name, and the Walkers are stubborn. And I believe God said, Deborah, okay, how about if I do these things? And she arranged to have people here with me right at the moments that I needed them. My cousin came in to say the prayer. My friend came in from Washington State to just spend some time when I needed someone to talk to. And my other cousin came here to be with me the day that Deborah passed. And now all these other wonderful people around that were so good to me, and Deborah, her brother and sister-in-law. Her brother came every day just to see her. I've got photos of the two of them sitting here talking. Her nieces, they came to her in the hospital, they came here when she was at home, and they've been here for me. I mean, just really, really wonderful. But again, it's because of who she was. And I'm okay. I went through all of that. I went through the loss of her, but I've been okay. I miss her terribly, but all of my thoughts are on the happy, wonderful, loving times with her, all the great things that we did. And the other belief I had, and not everybody shares this belief, and I don't care if they don't. The other belief I have is that I'm going to get to see her again. I don't know when that'll be, but I'll be happy when I can see her again. I do believe there's such a thing as soulmates, and she was mine. So Deborah was a strong, loving, wonderful, wonderful woman. She lived a very courageous life. She never allowed the things that went bad in her life to hurt her for any length of time. She never let that happen. She lived her life as fully as she was able to do. And she lived it pretty darn fully. And she made my life, this 3/4 of a century of my life, wonderful. She made my life everything good. And I will love her forever. I will continue to honor her memory in whatever way I can. So thanks for watching.